Greetings, my name is Ryan Nix. I'm a solutions architect with Amazon Web Services. I want to spend a few moments talking to you about IBM FileNet and some considerations around whether to build a solution like that or whether to simply procure one. Ultimately, do I bring my existing IBM FileNet implementation to AWS as a migration, or do I use AWS native services as a replacement for it? Where this comes from is, over the last few months, I've had many conversations with customers who are adopting AWS, they're moving into the cloud, they are entertaining whether they should bring their existing IBM investments as a lift and shift migration, or alternatively build something themselves and replace it, which is potentially worth discussing. Let's start by looking at, what is FileNet? For most of the field teams I work with, there isn't a familiarity with FileNet. So when we talk about IBM FileNet, IBM FileNet could manifest as a couple of different things. There is FileNet itself. It's available as a standalone product. It's a document management solution where you can upload documents, store them, search for those documents, provide metadata. It's a document management solution. That said, many customers are not just using the document management. They could be purchasing another product from IBM which has got FileNet with a couple of other building blocks clicked together, and you could end up with something by the name of IBM Content Management Services, but it still has the FileNet component as part of that collection of systems. You could get an even bigger suite of applications, and you could end up with IBM's Cloud Pak for Business Automation. Why I mention this is it's important to understand what version of the product are we dealing with so that we can talk about it from a licensing and underlying infrastructure perspective, but also understand what are all of the components, the knobs and dials, assess whether the customer is using those and whether those components could be realistically replaced or not. Ultimately, irrespective of which version of the product you're looking at, you do still have the basic concept of a document management system, so a interface that allows either programmatically application workloads or interactively human beings to upload, create documents, retrieve documents, search for them, delete them. It'll have a storage subsystem to store those documents. It'll typically have a relational database for the metadata related to that documentation. The most common databases that I see are things like IBM's DB2, other enterprise database engines such as Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server. These could be running as separate virtualized databases, or they could be containerized workloads. There's a fair bit of variety over here. If we have a look at one of the more encompassing larger implementations, if we look at something like Cloud Pak for Business Automation, Cloud Pak for Business Automation is a suite of things coupled together based on what customers potentially are commonly doing. So at its base, you've got Red Hat OpenShift. On top of that, you've got IBM's Cloud Pak for Data as an underlying building block. And then you've got all of these other components, these application modules that form part of FileNet itself or complement FileNet in terms of functions. So you'll see here there is Cloud Pak for Business Automation, and if you peel back the onion, you get FileNet, you get a Kafka layer there, there's a decision maker workflow, there is a automation workflow, there's insights, there's a content analyzer, there is even process mining information. So for customers that are using Cloud Pak for Business Automation, they're not just using a simplistic document management solution. There is decision-making workflows, there's a lot of automation, there's approval processes, there is document mining information, there is complex search and analytics that's being done over and above what you're getting from a very simple document storage option that is FileNet in itself, all running on top of Red Hat's OpenShift. And then, of course, because of this, there is a relational component, there's a non-relational database component, there's shared storage, there's object storage, there's quite a bit going on here. But let's take half a step back and let's have a look at some of the reasons why customers even start exploring, do I lift and shift my existing investment, or do I look at building something myself? So there's several drivers I've encountered, one of which is whether this is an acquisition, that is a company acquiring another company that already uses FileNet, or there is a company using FileNet and they just don't have the resources. So resource limitations or skill set or number of people could be a factor. Customers could be looking at, I don't have the ability to manage an aspect of this. Whether it is FileNet itself, typically isn't the case. It's usually driven by the newer versions of IBM software are containerized and they run on top of Red Hat OpenShift. And for many customers, that shift into potentially a containerized version that is new, or alternatively adopting OpenShift into their organization where they don't have the resources or they don't have the skill set to manage that OpenShift layer, becomes an area of exploration. Instead of me developing a new skill set or growing new capabilities, what if I just move away from the product? And the other option here is we do see in some customer cases a top-down directive. Company is headed towards the cloud. AWS may be a predefined destination and a mandate to adopt cloud native application workloads or cloud native services. And that statement could be ambiguous. Some people treat it as I have to go to the cloud and I have to use the products that specific cloud provider offers as part of my architectural design. That may be the intent. In some cases it's not. So we'll peel back the onion on that one. Product versions, licensing costs for many customers, they've got existing licensing. Some of them may perceive that this cost of the software solution is prohibitive, and they might be exploring, what are the alternatives? How can I get away from licensing and reduce the overall cost footprint of my application workload. In other cases, it could be I'm on one version of the product, and if I move to a newer version because the version I have is end of life, or alternatively I'm looking for new features that are only available in the latest version, does that force my hand into going into a different direction, such as a containerized version of the software running on top of OpenShift? Again, costs. In some cases, there's a lot of underlying infrastructure here. Can I potentially build something that's leaner than this? And then, of course, as I mentioned, the newer versions of IBM software typically are containerized. They are running on new architectures, and for some customers, this could be a daunting shift into the unknown. Could I explore an alternative instead of going down that path? So these are four very somewhat intertwined but common themes that are coming through in terms of why customers are starting these explorations. And I think it's important to understand what's driving these, because sometimes when we're exploring the options we have, we explore options for the wrong reasons, and we explore options that don't really address the underlying reasons that we're looking at that option. We tend to get sidetracked. Okay, so on face value, AWS has a very broad portfolio of AWS native services, over 200 services that customers can click together to build whatever they want. Vast majority of these services are built from the ground up to be scalable, elastic, secure, highly resilient. So they solve a lot of the building block problems for customers. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've done a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting for you. So on face value, when we're looking at something like standalone FileNet that is just a document storage solution, could we replace that with a build option? So if we look at this, we need somewhere to store the documents, the actual files. So Amazon's S3 becomes a fantastic candidate here. It's resilient, it's highly durable, it's scalable. You're only paying for what you utilize. So S3 very, very good candidate here. As a way of reading and writing in and out of S3, if we're looking at some sort of search capabilities, we typically would look at some sort of small microservice collection to do that. That could be running on a serverless architecture, something like AWS Lambda. If the customer doesn't have familiarity with building serverless functions, utilizing something like Lambda, they could go for something a little bit more familiar and collapse those into a serverless architecture running on a lean container workload. And that could be running on something like Amazon's EKS, or if they're coming from a Kubernetes standpoint, or alternatively go something like ECS, which is yet another orchestrator. Again, you don't want to pass all of that information out to the open world, so putting that behind some sort of API gateway as a controlled entry point into the environment. And then of course we need to cater for the metadata that is related to those documents. That could be in the form of a relational database running on top of something like Amazon's relational database RDS, Aurora. It could even be inside something like DynamoDB as a NoSQL option over there. So if we have a look at this, we could take these AWS services and provide users with a API endpoint sitting behind an API gateway, gain CloudFront as a means of providing some caching layer or acceleration to that, data synchronization, document storage inside my data. ECS over here having the tasks for search, upload, retrieval, all of the actual instructions that we would have. Again, we could have something like Amazon's EventBridge or simple queuing service providing the queuing and messaging components of interacting between these components. Everything talking to something in the background like S3. So on face value, it does seem very plausible to build a replacement to a document storage solution like IBM FileNet using AWS building blocks. I think the first thing that we need to be very clear about is AWS does not have an out-of-the-box product that will give customers what they're getting from IBM FileNet. What we're really talking about is we're taking a lot of different AWS services and the customer could click them together and build something. And the minute you start building something, we need to be very realistic by what that means. It means that we're investing effort into the development, the creation of this product, but then we're also owning the long-term life cycle of this product. So its evolution, its updates, its software life cycle now becomes something that the customer would manage. Right, so there are some considerations here. So first thing is, what are we actually talking about replacing? For some customers, many customers, it's not simply just a document solution. If the customer came to me and said, I'm just using the components that are a simple document solution, the only functions I need is to be able to upload, delete, retrieve files, very simplistic search, something like that previous architecture could work very well. However, for majority of the customers that I'm working with, they're not just doing that. They're utilizing a lot more in terms of search capabilities. So full-featured search, complex indexing mechanisms, reporting, visualization of that reporting. For many customers, there is a workflow and a decision-making layer where documents are not just uploaded. There is a approvals process, some of that being automated, some of that going through complex workflows. There is version control. There is retentions for insurance companies, as an example. They're dealing with insurance contracts. So while that contract is being negotiated, the files are editable, they're searchable, they can interact with them, but once the contract is finalized, it gets locked down, retained, it gets treated as a record that cannot be changed. So those functions need to be catered for. IBM's FileNet is built on top of IBM's WebSphere. Now, components of FileNet itself are running as WebSphere applications. So if we replace FileNet, I'm not too worried about those. However, some customers are building their own customized application workloads, their own custom business functions over and above what FileNet does, and they're running it on top of that WebSphere layer. So if we have a customer that has let's say several thousand customized application workloads running in IBM WebSphere, and we just replace the FileNet, what happens to those potentially 1,000 custom application workloads? And if we're going to replace those, then we're talking about 1,000 separate applications that we need to understand what is the building blocks of those. Can those be replaced, or do those need to be migrated out? So that customized layer becomes an overlooked area of exploration, something that we definitely should be asking, is it there, and scrutinized if it is. Again, integrations, dependencies with other systems. If you look at components like IBM MQ, it's a queuing mechanism. Yes, you can replace a queuing mechanism. However, if that queuing mechanism is talking to other queuing mechanisms and there's a compatibility requirement, or if your architectural design interacts with other entities, other businesses that you can't control what they use. The banking industry is a prime example of this, where many of the banks and insurance companies use IBM MQ. Just because you want to change MQ doesn't mean that the interactive companies that you're exchanging data with are also going to change MQ. So how much control do you have over all of the different things that you touch, and can you realistically change those with ease? Then, of course, we can build each and every layer of this. We can find an AWS solution to solve all of these problems. The question is, how big is the scope of this creation process? How big a software stack am I taking on building myself and maintaining myself? So when we look at build versus buy, there's a couple of factors here. Some of these are obvious. There's time. It takes time to build the solution. It takes time to evolve it. Does the customer have a time frame that lends itself to this? Are they going to go down the path of let's say a 5 to 7 year journey to create a replacement for the system? If it's a long-term roadmap, great. If this is a customer that is going into a software lifecycle renewal in the next 3 months, and they're entertaining building all of this out in the next 90 days, how realistically is that? Do they have the development resources? Do they have the skill set to build this out? Are they going to bring in an external provider to meet that time frame? Does building a replacement like this, does taking on the ownership of a new application stack actually address the underlying concerns? So let's go back to our original concerns. If this was a concern around avoiding something like OpenShift, it seems like a huge undertaking to simply get away from running OpenShift yourself. There may be different options. You might be addressing the skill set concerns around adopting something new in a product, but there's a whole different sets of skill sets that are required in the undertaking of building out a software stack and maintaining that. And I think the realization of you're not just building out this, you're maintaining it, is a very big consideration for customers. Is this something that you are going to embark on as part of your broader business strategy, or is this a bit of a foolhardy attempt? And I'm not saying one way or the other. This is really, you need to internalize this within the context of your own business. So let's address those underlying concerns. If we start looking at, a resource or a skill set limitation, building out a replacement solution could aggravate this. You could end up with a requirement for a completely different skill set, a developer skill set to own the application, and you would have the need for resources to maintain this. Potentially moving to something like a SaaS version, or moving to some other option of FileNet, could be a better option than building it out. So if you do have resource limitations on FileNet, maybe exploring something like a SaaS version of FileNet that gives you the same product capabilities but without the administrative overhead. Again, if you look at top-down directives to adopt native services, absolutely, do that where it makes sense. Bring in things that complement what you're doing with your existing investments. So, bring in things such as Amazon S3 and change out your storage layer. You get the benefits of S3, you get the benefits that it provides to your existing IBM investment. Have a look at changing out the shared storage. Have a look at changing out the databases to a managed version of a database using RDS. But you don't need to go and replace the entire empire, but there definitely are ways that you can have native services complement your existing investment without having to rebuild everything from scratch. Concerns around product versions, licensing and costs. Now, these are very, very real concerns, and AWS have a partner team that works very closely with our partners that are implementation partners, as well as our partners that are SI partners, IBM being one of them. So if you are looking at this from the perspective of, I just want to get away from licensing costs, I would first start by having a discussion with account teams and see, what incentives, what sort of discounted rates, what can we do to alleviate some of those costs before going down the path of building something entirely net new. Again, cost of migrations, many incentive programs could be brought into the discussion here. The customers who are looking at, I'm utilizing a certain set of features right now, and if I adopt the latest version, I get a whole bunch of functions and features that I'm not going to use. Now, that may be very true. However, there's sometimes merit in exploring what are those new features and functions, and could I get a business value benefit from them. So we've had several customers that have, for example, moved into Cloud Pak for Business Automation. On face value, they're buying and deploying a lot more than they'd ever need. But then looking at those new functions and features, adopting them and growing them into the business has provided them with new capabilities, new innovations, and a way to provide new capabilities to their customers. And certainly there are SI partners that can help you explore what that means for your business and take advantage of it. So yes, you'd be building out a larger component, potentially paying a little bit more for it, but getting a lot more value out of it. Then of course there's the concern around, moving to new architectures, moving to something that is inherently containerized. Maybe it triggers something like OpenShift, and there's two options or two considerations here. One is, if you're concerned around managing OpenShift, many of our OpenShift customers are moving to managed OpenShift, where Red Hat SRE teams manage the OpenShift on your behalf, and you don't need to focus on doing all of the heavy lifting yourself. The other option is, some of my customers have already invested in a container strategy. They've adopted something like Amazon's EKS as part of their container strategy. Now when they bring an IBM workload in, they're told it only is supported on Red Hat's OpenShift. So the question is, if I'm already investing in EKS, I don't want to invest in OpenShift. I don't want two different things. Many customers are running multiple orchestration platforms side by side. It is not the end of the world, and it can be done effectively. We can certainly bring managed OpenShift as a way of alleviating some of the overhead to that sort of duality of architectural requirement. Quickly, when I look at some alternatives over here. So for customers who have an existing investment for EKS and they don't want to go down the path of having OpenShift in the same environment, you can run the standalone version of FileNet. This is just FileNet in itself as a containerized workload on Amazon's EKS. So you can go that path, but then you lose a lot of the whistles and bells that you potentially get from, say, a Cloud Pak for Business Automation. So I would start by having a look at, what are the features and components of standalone FileNet, compare that to what you're using, and you could run that on top of EKS. If you are in a situation where you require more than those components and you are going into something like a Cloud Pak for Business Automation, then you are going to face the reality of, I'm going to run OpenShift in my environment alongside my existing investment of EKS, but then something like managed OpenShift or ROSA becomes a compelling alternative there. Don't want to move to a new version of the software because it's going to change my architectural design. That is a consideration you need to take into account. I think the first step there is, do you have existing licensing for that older version? Because if you don't, you might not be able to buy the older version of the product now. So again, it depends on where you are in your software life cycle and what is IBM's attitude towards selling and maintaining that older version. When do these licenses expire? Are they going to be part of your life cycle for the next 3 to 5 years? Will they be supported in the future? So for many customers, support is a very critical component, and if they pick up the phone and reach out to IBM for assistance, is that supported in that architecture? And then, of course, does the customer gain any significant benefit from the newer version? Newer versions do provide a containerized platform, which means that the newer versions of the software are built to be more resilient. They're taking advantage of how microservice architectures are being done. They're taking advantage of the operators with inside OpenShift. Means updates, new version deployments, failure detection and failure resolution, resilience in those applications are significantly improved. And if you're an old school FileNet customer and you've done an update to FileNet on the older pre-containerized versions, there is a tangible fear that could blow up in your face. I have not seen those challenges with the newer container versions. They tend to manage upgrades and maintenance significantly better than their predecessor products. And then, of course, if you're concerned around implementation or managing this, there's a lot of SI partners that we could help either extend your manpower, help you build out these technologies, or help you grow into new features and capabilities. There are alternatives. That said, there's nothing set in stone here. It really is up to the customer to decide, do I want to lift and shift my existing investment, or do I want to build something new? If you're going to build something new, we'll absolutely help you, but you do need to be realistic about every single layer, feature and function that you're using, and find a replacement for that component. So if you look at AWS services that are going to complement bringing in existing investment to AWS, managed OpenShift or ROSA on AWS definitely is going to be an attractive building block over there. Shifting to a managed database, something like a RDS running either Microsoft SQL, Oracle, and now DB2 as the newest member to the family over there is compelling. Many of the IBM software solutions having support for RDS across multiple database engines. So I even see customers looking at changing the underlying database engine, potentially running on Oracle and exploring moving to something like DB2 because it is more cost effective from a licensing standpoint. You're still getting a managed database, still making a bit of a shift over there, but you're getting away from that more expensive licensing implication from Oracle, shifting to DB2. Storage options, as I alluded to previously, S3, fantastic way of dealing with object store. And even if you're staying with IBM FileNet across its different versions, S3 gives you a much more manageable, much more scalable approach. So you could potentially yield something like a 30 to 60% cost reduction on your storage just by adopting S3. And again, if you have a requirement for a shared storage layer, the cloud packs, such as Cloud Pak for Business Automation, will have a mandated requirement of a shared storage layer for the Cloud Pak itself. So adopting something like Amazon's FSx NetApp ONTAP, very popular, or the Elastic file system as well. Closing thoughts, don't rule out a migration of something instead of building, even if it is a short-term endeavor and your long-term endeavor is to gradually wean yourself off of that product. Get into AWS, take advantage of those native services to complement it, and then start your longer journey of modernization away from the product if desired while you're on AWS. So absolutely reach out to the AWS partner team, reach out to your IBM and Red Hat account teams, and we can help you through that journey. We can help you reutilize existing licensing or procure new software subscriptions through something like AWS Marketplace that gives you discounted options and incentives. We can help you through a journey of modernizing with the latest IBM offers combined with AWS native services, so you get the best of both worlds. If you are going to go down the path of building something new, if you're only using a document store option, it becomes low-hanging fruit. It becomes something that's achievable in a short term. If you're not just using a simple document storage solution, you need to be realistic around this. It could be a multi-year journey, and you need to be willing to build and maintain that replacement at multiple layers. I think the big scary one here is if you have layer upon layer upon layer of customization. It's those customizations that are going to throw you the most curveballs over here. With the building something new approach, I think we need to come back to what is it that I'm really trying to address, and does building that as net new actually address the underlying concerns? If it's not addressing that, then I recommend going and having a look at an alternative over there. If you want to dive deeper into any of this discussion, please do reach out to your AWS account team, and they can reach out to the IBM partner team, and we'll happily jump onto a call and help you explore, which direction makes more sense for you. Thank you for allowing me to plant the seed of some food for thought here, and as always, a pleasure having you here.